Hey guys, welcome back to the shop. In honor of the cold snap that we got here a couple of days ago on the west side of Texas, we're going to build a blade that hails from one of the, if not the coldest places on earth, the Yakut knife. As a bladesmith and someone who's interested in history, I've always enjoyed reading about different cultures and their interaction with blades. Every culture throughout history, including modern or present day, uses knives all the time, some kind of edged tool in preparing food, making clothing, manufacturing of all sorts of different things. Whether it's in the hands of an artisan or attached to a machine that you simply push a button and produce something, blades are in use across all countries every day. But I'm most interested in older cultures that developed particular styles or designs of blades for the things that they needed to do. I asked the question, why are they shaped that way? What is the purpose behind that design? And so in building the Yakut knife here, I'm hoping to get a little bit closer to understanding why they might have made the knife the way they did. Doing some reading on this subject before building this blade here, learning about the Sakha people of the northeastern region of what we call Russia today. They are a distinct ethnic group that was invaded and taken over by Russia back in the early to mid 1600s. But their culture and practices are similar to what we might recognize in North American natives, although I'm sure they would consider themselves distinct from any other tribes. But their blades are recently coming into popularity more as the Yakut knife, and you see most of them with a wider forged fuller on one side of the blade. There are actually historical and archaeological examples of a pattern welded, or as we call it, Damascus steel blade on a Yakut knife, and apparently the Sakha people had a robust blacksmithing tradition and knowledge. And of course, as with many cultures, blacksmiths were revered for their skill and knowledge because, as you might imagine, their ability to create a useful tool, a knife, that everybody needed was very important to their society. And so whether they were carving wood or processing reindeer or whatever it is, a knife in many of these early cultures was pivotal, something that everybody carried and everybody needed. So I chose to go with the pattern welded Damascus steel design here to just add an additional element to this project here. I still want to build the mono steel version with the forge finished fuller on it, but we're going to do the pattern welded Damascus today. I'm using 80 CRV2 steel combined with 15N20 saw blade steel. The saw blade steel coming from a North Idaho lumber mill. Great little background there. And we'll layer this up to 30 layers, heat it up, apply some flux, get it up to forge welding temperature, and start squishing these layers together to provide the billet that we need to make this project. There's a lot of conjecture as to why the design of the Yakut knife is the way it is. What's with the fuller and the convex side on the other side of the knife? Some people believe that it might have something to do with copying the design of bone knives that the culture used prior to understanding ironworking, where if you use a piece of bone, a large bone, and split it down the middle, you've got a convex side on one side of it and concave on the other with the two flats that you can use for an edge. I don't know if that's what the case is or not, but either way, it makes for a stronger, lighter blade in the same dimensions than a different design. This is obviously so much easier with the forging press. I think about primitive blacksmiths from all different cultures and just the different work that they were able to do by hand, of course, usually with an apprentice or additional people helping, but you think about that still, and no wonder a good blade or even a sword in different cultures was so expensive. I let my billet cool down in the forge from a low orange heat, and that should get it soft enough to saw through easily. This is, of course, not a very high carbon steel, and so it's going to be a little easier to work with in that regard too. I'm going to start by grinding all the forge scale off of each piece of the billet with my angle grinder. The forge scale is quite hard and very hard on your grinding belts, and so once that's ground off, you can straighten things up on the 2x72 grinder, and we'll restack them. I'm finding that this drill press vise makes an excellent pattern welded steel holding jig for getting everything stacked up and tack welded together so it stays together in the forge. Of course, other people have done this, but after purchasing the drill press vise for the drill press, I actually use it more for this right here. I dip the billets in diesel fuel. That provides some protection as you put it into the forge, and perhaps even a little bit of carbon deposit as it's heating up to a temperature that the flux will melt and integrate into the layers, and then we'll continue heating up from there to forge welding temperature. And as you press those together, the flux is squished out and the steel bonded together. I want to make a ladder pattern. It's going to be a stretched out ladder pattern, and the thicker your billet is when you integrate this pattern, the more you're going to have to forge it out, and it's going to be more stretched out. But I like the effect here, so that's what we're doing on this. Try forging in the tip on this billet with the round dies here, and the concept I think is sound. Haven't tried this before, but it seems to be fairly effective. Have to clean things up a little bit though. Something that I found interesting with this project is combining this blade design with a pattern welded Damascus billet. I think actually ends up being a great combination in a way that I didn't expect, and I'll show you that here at the end of the video, so stay tuned for that. A lot of people believe that pattern welded Damascus is far and above much better than any mono steel blade. That's simply not true. When you combine two different steels, you get a blade that is the sum total of those two steels. But what is interesting is the mechanical aspect of combining two different steels. And while again you never get anything more than the sum total, you can get a patterned blade that cuts at least as well as the best cutting steel that you used in the billet. If you're interested in the sharpness and cutting ability of pattern welded Damascus steel, check out the video by Dr. Laren Thomas on Knife Steel Nerds right here on YouTube. Struggling with the swage block here. It's a rather heavy bit of steel, and I want to use the radius here as the backer, or the die I should say, for forging this Yakut style blade. This blade has a fuller on one side, and the opposite side is a convex bevel on the entire surface of the blade. And so fortunately I have the use of this swage block. My buddy Austin has loaned it to me for some time, much appreciated. I thought I was going to be needing to use the largest radius fuller there on the swage block. I was mistaken, as you'll see in a minute. But I've got the tip forged down in the tang, and we're going to start this fullering process. Now this hammer is too small. I need to forge a medium-sized ball peen hammer or something like that. But it became apparent to me quite quickly that this was the wrong size radius, much to my surprise, and I actually went to, I don't know, one of the smaller sides here and continued on. Now, I am not concerned with forging this fuller down as far as I would be if I was doing a mono steel blade, leaving a forged finished fuller. Say that 5 times fast. Can't even do that. And the reason is because I'm going to grind this fuller out, and it's going to display the pattern welded steel pattern on there. It's going to be etched out, and I don't want to leave a forged finish on there, because that's going to leave a bad surface to reveal this pattern welded steel that we have in the blade. So there it is, all forged out. And there's still quite a bit of extra material, and you'll probably notice that I've got some minor cold shuts from my ladder pattern on the convex side of the blade. Not a big deal. I'm going to go ahead and do my normalizing and grain refinement cycles on this blade before I address that. I don't want to quench the blade with those minor cold shuts, but it'll be fine to do everything but harden the steel prior to addressing that. So I'm just going to clean the steel up here. I'm using Parks 50 on this. The 80 CRV2 may or may not need the Parks 50, but the 15 and 20 does. And as far as I know, as I have used it multiple times on 80 CRV2, it does not hurt it one bit. Alright, so it needs a little straightening. I don't know if I introduced some additional issues with the fullering or perhaps just the pattern welded. Sometimes it needs a little extra help. So after the quench, you've got a window of time to straighten that blade as it slowly hardens, and it is quite hard. Now that we've tempered the blade, I can finish grind it, and as I am cleaning things up, you'll notice that my fuller almost completely disappears, which is what it is. First time I've ever forged a Yakut style knife, so I'll know next time that I was still quite a ways away from where I would want to be if I was forging in a fuller and leaving it at that finish. But again, like I said, in this case, I want to grind away that steel anyway. So we've got a nice clean fuller to leave that pattern welded Damascus visible. I'm using my 2-inch contact wheel on my KMG Classic grinder, just carefully feeling that out. Now, I made a mistake, or at least I did something I wasn't intending to do, and that was I ground the fuller all the way back up into the what would be the ricasso area of the blade. I wasn't thinking about it. I was just kind of following the lines on the knife there, but I wanted to, or I should have, left that fuller starting about 3/4 of an inch to 1/2 an inch away from the juncture of the tang in the blade. After a bunch of hand sanding, we've got things cleaned up and to a nice finish, and we'll add some ferric chloride to the water in this glass jar and start the etching process. You can see that Damascus pattern starting to come out right there, and we'll have it in and out of the etch multiple times, cleaning off the oxides with a fine grit sandpaper. Once that's complete, we can start on the handle, and I'm using some elk antler for the bolster, I guess you could call it, part of the handle, right up close to the blade. Because I ground that fuller up close to the tang, I'm going to have to sink that part of that down into the handle assembly. It might even be a little more correct historically, or with as far as an artifact goes, I don't know, but it's going to be quite functional, so I'm not concerned about that. And the next time I build one of these blades, I'm going to do something that allows me to put a nice brass or nickel silver type bolster on there. Grind some grooves in the tang to lock that into place with the epoxy, and that tang goes almost the entire length of the handle here. The Yakut style knife has an egg-shaped cross-section to the handle, so the fat or large end of the egg is at the top and the narrow is at the bottom where the fingers wrap around the handle. Very comfortable, very practical design, and there's really no taper to the handle. There's not much else going on here, just a very basic, serviceable handle on this blade here. I'm using my granddad or great-granddad's Arkansas whetstone here, oil stone, to start polishing up those flats on the concave side of the blade. Now, as far as if this is better or easier, I don't think it's easier. I think it is simpler. You're simply putting that flat side of the blade down onto your stone and taking material off. I think it's a little more labor intensive though, because you're actually taking more material off. But is it effective? Yes. All right, guys, this has been an interesting project, and I feel like it's given me just a little bit of insight into the blade culture of an ethnic group which survived for hundreds, if not thousands of years by the very edge of their blades, and they used this design for a long, long time. I'm going to talk about something that I did not expect here in just a minute. We're going to do a little bit of cutting and talk about one aspect here on this blade, and I'm going to show you pictures of the whole knife, so stay tuned for that in just a couple of seconds. If you've enjoyed this video, support the channel, subscribe, leave a comment, all that good stuff. Appreciate you guys watching, and we will see you on the next video. So actually I had to use my coarser bench stone, spent quite a bit of time getting this down to a good edge, and then I've also stropped this, but I just have to try this out. This edge blade geometry, never tried this before, and look at that. As you would expect, that just scoops the wood out. This is not quite as sharp as it actually could be even, so I have to do a little more work on it, but it'll still shave. So I got to point this out because what I'm experiencing here is you have a clean polished edge on this side, but the Damascus steel, pattern welded Damascus steel layers that we put in there with the ladder pattern, if you look at the spine, you can see how they are wavy. That's exactly how they are at the edge here. And they really come into play with the fact that this side is integrated right into this side of the edge, this convex side of the blade. You get the full characteristic of that wavy edge with the pattern welded steel. And you can actually see, I don't know if you can see it on the camera, but I can see it. It very much accentuates that saw blade like characteristic that some people talk about with pattern welded steel. You don't get that as much when you have both angles on the edge polished and stropped, but I'm really experiencing that here. That is making this cut a little less effectively on this wood, but I can see how it would work just a trick when skinning, processing meat, anything to do with you know, processing game, that kind of scenario. And of course you could work a little more on here and get this to a real clean edge for wood carving and stuff. But as it is right now, it's very toothy, very aggressive, and I can see how it would work really great with a lot of the different animal processing tasks. So very interesting.